Hi everyone, you're listening to Nick.
And I'm Helena, and we both work here at the MST Trust, which is a charity for people affected by MS in the UK. And we are here today to help you make sense of MS.
Yeah, and this is our podcast, which is multiple sclerosis, breaking it down. And we're going to welcome in the new year with a special podcast today.
Yeah, Happy New Year, everyone. We're looking forward to be bringing you lots of interesting episodes of Breaking It Down during 2024.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that, Helena. And I know, I think me and you've talked a lot about different things that we wanted to try and start for the year, or New Year's resolutions that I'm not very good at keeping. Do you have any New Year's resolutions this time around?
Oh gosh, no. You see, I don't really like New Year's resolutions. I always used to do them beforehand, but I always find that there's like a whole pressure of a new year, and then you're trying to change everything in January when you're normally really kind of tired and worn out from all the stress of Christmas. So I think you're almost like setting yourself up a little bit for failure and disappointment. But I get like the new year can be like a fresh start or something, but it's technically just a date in the calendar, isn't it? So you could start whenever, but I guess like middle of February resolutions doesn't really sound as good as a New Year's resolution, does it?
Yeah, it doesn't have quite the same ring to it, does it? But yeah, it's a difficult time of year as well, isn't it? Because you go from the festive season straight, if you are doing the New Year's resolutions for like on the health kit kind of thing, to straight into that. That can be quite a difficult transition. I always find, for me personally anyway. But yeah, so I think with this podcast, instead of sort of cutting everything out or trying something new in January, in terms of like exercise and diet, we know there's lots of information and content out there about those things. So we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk today about mindfulness.
And I'm really excited about this topic because it's something that I would really like to learn more about and probably start practicing myself. But I've always been really worried that my brain is just simply too busy to be able to do it. As I was preparing for this episode, I thought I would Google the definition of mindfulness. And obviously, this was just like the first thing that popped up in Google. And it said the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something. Which made me question a little bit how awake and conscious I am at most times, but it was, well, especially without any coffee. But it also made me think about how often I can like really zone out and not be aware of things that's going on. I think sometimes, especially when MS fatigue takes over, I can just find myself like kind of staring into to the wall and kind of disappearing a little bit, like I'm off to space. Or sometimes when my mind gets like really bombarded with too much things, or if that when it's really noisy, I just kind of check out a little bit. And I can get a bit overwhelmed or stressed by things. So I like the idea of mindfulness because quite a lot of people has actually suggested it to me just because of some of these issues that I struggle with.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think we all have this idea of mindfulness in our, that we kind of perceive it as you have to be underneath a waterfall or like on a beach and like doing the lotus position and all that stuff. So it's interesting hearing you just read out that definition.
Yeah.
It's actually, I'm sure we'll get into this with our guest.
Yeah.
But it's you don't have to be sat in the really uncomfortable position and somewhere beautiful. You could do it anywhere. So so I think with that in mind, before I give anything too much away, we should probably dive into our interview, which is with Justin Standfield. So Justin's a mindfulness teacher and he also lives with MS, so he has a really good background from both living with MS and also how to best practice mindfulness. And he has some really good insight into some really kind of specific MS related practices that you can do as well. So he's going to share his journey. We'll also hear about how you might be starting to have a go at some of these things, Helena, as well as you chat to Justin. So I think without any further ado, let's jump into the interview.
I'm here today with Justin Standfield, and we're going to talk a little bit about mindfulness. But before we start, Justin, would you mind telling us a little bit about who you are and your own MS journey?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. So, yes, I'm Justin. I'm based on the south coast of the UK, and professionally, I teach mindfulness among some other things related to resilience and well-being. I also train leaders on how to be more effective at that job. So, in amongst all of that, I also have some time for my family as well. So, I have a son. I'm married, I have a dog, quite a busy life actually, and I have MS as well. So, one of the things that I've noticed is that in recent years, I'm pleased to see a growth and an openness towards things like mindfulness and other practices from people who have MS and from professionals as well.
Yeah, it's been a bit of a buzzword recently, hasn't it? I think
Yeah.
it's really nice to see. Um, do you mind talking us through a little bit about how you were diagnosed yourself?
Yeah, certainly. Like many people, it was a long road actually. So from my first episode of MS in 2001, the diagnosis took 13 years. So I originally had optic neuritis in 2001, and then over the years, a few other things weren't quite right, but finally in 2014 that's when I was diagnosed. And yeah, at that point, it wasn't really a shock. I'll be honest with you. It was a bit of a relief to finally have some questions answered and looking forward to getting onto some treatment as well and being part of, I suppose, that the system around
Mm,
MS and having appointments and finally feeling like somebody's noticing that things are not right for me. Yeah.
yeah. Gosh, that's a long time waiting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Um, so for MS Awareness Week last year, we streamed a video of you talking about and doing mindfulness, and it was really popular. So I thank you so much for coming back to talk to us about it. Can you tell us how did you start with mindfulness? What made you want to get into it?
I think I was about 16 when I first discovered meditation. And although it wasn't mindfulness meditation as such, or at least it wasn't labeled mindfulness meditation, looking back, it was really some of those core practices of noticing the breath and accepting the present moment and whatever's going on. It really was mindfulness. Then a few years later, I decided to learn more traditional Buddhist meditation and then expanded that into what's now called mindfulness based stress reduction. So, MBSR is pretty well known nowadays. And then have since completed teacher training courses, additional training beyond that, and have practiced regularly for a number of years. Um, the original interest that I had in meditation and mindfulness, I suppose, was really just more exploring reality. And for a 16-year-old, that sort of sounds a little bit grandiose, really, now I say it. But it was just sort of, what else is there, and how do we perceive the world, and how our mental health can adjust how we perceive the world was quite fascinating to me. Um, then, in recent years, around the MS diagnosis, I just put the two things together, and in my mind, it made sense to say, well, if part of my reality, part of my present moment experience is sometimes discomfort, is sometimes pain, is sometimes tension, weird sensations, also the sort of mood aspects of having
Mm,
MS as well. To be frank, it's not always fun.
no.
And actually, if mindfulness could help with some of that, let's see what's out there. So then my research took me to quite a few different clinical trials and academic papers, and just talking to other people who have chronic pain conditions as well.
That's really, really interesting. So you're quite passionate about mindfulness for people with MS, then I take it.
I am at the same time. I think I balance my own passion with a patience, I think, for some people finding it in their own way, and some
Mm,
people trying it and deciding it's not for them, and for people to decide for themselves what is right for their situation and how their MS presents for them. So yeah, I feel that's important for me to say. So
yeah.
I'm not massively evangelical about it Well, maybe I am. But I try and temper it with, yes, some realization that those of us who have MS, mainly, not all, but mainly we're adults, and mainly that means that we are decision makers in our own care and our own treatment, and how we want to live our lives. So I try not to sell it to people. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, you want people to find their own journey.
Yeah,
find
I
it.
think so.
Yeah.
I think so. And the whole principles around being mindful and mindful meditation, for example, patience. One of them is called non-striving, which is about not trying too hard to have the result that you expect from engaging in mindfulness meditation. That's an underlying philosophy of mindfulness, really. So with that in mind, it doesn't make sense for me to promise to people, do this and this will be the end result. Rather more to say, here are some ways you could bring this into your life. And if you find it's beneficial, keep doing it. If you find there's no change, well, even if your MS relationship is your relationship with the disease is still the same, there may be other benefits that mindfulness gives you. But if somebody said to me, you know what, I'm doing this mindfulness meditation thing, Justin, and it's not helping. In fact, I'm really not enjoying it. Then I'd say, don't do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for somebody who is a bit of a novice in the world of mindfulness, could you talk us through some of the techniques that you use?
Sure, yeah. So for me personally, I use some of the core practices around noticing the breath, noticing the in and out breath, not needing to change the breath particularly, but just noticing my own breathing as it happens, noticing my bodily sensations, noticing my thoughts as I have them, and being aware of emotions, of feelings that come up as well. And the reason I say the things I do personally is things that I teach and share to others. Whilst I do practice all of those, there are some real go-to things that I tend to rely on, those that I've just mentioned,
Yeah.
and a couple of others that are more guided meditation. So mindfulness isn't only meditating, but a core part of it is meditation. And a guided meditation is when you listen to someone's voice. I usually choose to listen to somebody else's voice, not my own, and they can take you through things like gradual muscle relaxation, or exploring emotions, or sometimes more visualization activities as well.
Yeah, I've seen, because there's been a few sort of links and things I've looked at where there's all these different types of meditations for this. Or if you're feeling, you're feeling anxious about appointments, so they can be very specific, some of these guided type things.
They can, yeah, and I think that's really good that there's this recognition that for certain events in your life when you have MS, like big appointments, for example, like going in an MRI scanner can be quite stressful for some people, that some of the core practices around anticipatory stress, or anxiety because something is about to happen to you, can be adapted to make the wording even more accessible in specific situations for those of us with MS as well, like worrying about the future. That's another one. We all worry about the future. That's something that's common to human beings. But there's I suspect there's a particular type of worrying about the future that affects those with chronic illnesses slightly differently. So, yeah.
So if you're completely new to this, what's the best way to get started?
There are so many ways to get started. I'd say for anyone who's thinking about getting started, question to ask yourself would be, what method would suit your lifestyle at the moment? What method would suit your lifestyle most easily, most readily? For example, you can learn on YouTube videos. You can learn on apps. There are some brilliant apps. You can learn on live online classes. So people like me, or you can go to a class and learn in person with other people as well. So thinking about, well, which of those would suit the amount of time that I can give? Traveling, can I travel? Do I want to travel? Do I also want to do it with other people, or do I want to do it on my own? Once you've answered those questions, I think that would give you a closer idea of the best way to start. But I think the best methods to use once you've decided when and how and where you want to do it, are the core practices around, first of all, learning what mindfulness is. Learning what it isn't is quite important as well, that mindfulness isn't a mystical thing. You're not going to levitate. Yeah, yeah, you
That
don't
would
have
be
to.
useful.
It would be great at times, wouldn't it? Let's be honest, I'm up for a bit of that.
Yeah.
But I think then once you understand what it is, there's nothing can beat having a go, and having a go with a teacher, with a trained teacher, is the preferred option.
Yeah.
I would say, just so that you are sort of starting off, gradually building up your practice in a way that is easy to follow, and
Yeah.
that there's a habit that forms, but also because a teacher can help you to navigate some of the very normal obstacles that can come up when you first learn as well, which you don't always get from reading it in a book or watching a video.
Yeah, that's very true, and it's nice to have someone to ask questions while you're trying to do it. I think, because you mentioned a few things. You mentioned videos and apps and teachers. I guess we can list some links in the show notes as well to some different things. So and we will also link to your video that you did with us, because I think that could be quite useful. How long would you say, like, if you go to a course, how long do they normally take? How many weeks?
It does depend, but there is a course called Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction. That's one of several, but Mindfulness-Based Stress Reduction, MBSR, tends to be 8 weeks long for 2 hours at a time. So 2 hours a week for 8 weeks, usually with some form of retreat event as well built into it, which is easier to do face to face than it is online. An online sort of full day or half day retreat can be a little unusual. Not impossible. And there will be homework with that type of course as well. So by homework, I don't mean writing, but practicing. So if somebody was looking at doing mindfulness-based stress reduction, which has got a pain element to it, among other things, that requires some commitment in terms of coming every week, coming for the 2 hours, and doing anywhere from between sort of 10 minutes to 40 minutes a day of practicing as well. But there are shorter courses available as well. So a lot of providers and a lot of online schools offer bite-sized introductions, and something that a bit more manageable for busy lives, maybe more like, an hour a week. And sometimes shorter duration for the whole course, sometimes longer duration, 12 weeks. So really, it does really vary. So again, I think there's a question to ask ourselves there about what will fit with my energy levels, with my appetite for doing this, and of course my lifestyle as well, my commitments at home.
That's really interesting. So I will put my hands up and confess that I've tried a few times, but I've never tried a proper kind of training course. I've tried a few of these apps, that there, and I love the idea of it. And I was really like, I'm gonna get this done now. But I found when I sat down and I was like, no, I'm gonna try and think of nothing, and it was just like my brain suddenly went, oh, we're having a quiet moment, so now we need to think about this. We need to think about this. We need to think about all these things that we need doing. And I was almost to the point where I was like, oh my goodness, this is just too many thoughts at once. So my question here is, if you tried it and you struggled a bit, and this, I guess, will be more like the people like myself who maybe tried it on my own rather than with a teacher, do you have any top tips?
Yes, for sure. I suppose, listening to your example, one of my first thoughts is that when we approach meditation as part of mindfulness, the aim is not really to have a blank mind. So a lot of people do think that is the case, and then struggle to have a blank mind, because you know what, the mind is never blank. The mind is never peace and quiet, tranquility, whatever we think it will be, a big white wall or something, is impossible. Because
I'm so glad you said that.
I mean, I couldn't do it. I could probably go about 6 seconds before I'd start thinking, oh, my left leg's gone numb. What's that noise? Is that the doorbell? So first thing is don't worry about going for a blank mind and not achieving it. The mind chucks thoughts at us all the time. And that's what minds do on automatic, is throw things. Some of those will be in the past, so memories, regurgitating a conversation I had this morning. Some of it will be more future based, so wondering about what I need to put on my shopping list for later on, or thinking about a big interview I've got to do tomorrow, or something mundane, like, it's raining. Am I going to take the dog out later? And all of that and everything else in between is completely normal. What mindfulness is about is being mindful of those thoughts as you have them. And it's about the difference between, I suppose some people would say, I would say, it's the difference between living a life on automatic pilot where those thoughts pop up and we aren't conscious that we're having them. And then before we know it, we've indulged that thought and taken it to its end conclusion. And then we might have the associated stress or anxiety or low mood that goes with that thought, almost as if we're living it for real, even though it's a thought. Instead, we still have that same thought, but we notice we're having the thought almost like a detached observer of that thought. Sounds like an odd concept, I know, but it's sometimes described as putting some distance between you and your thoughts. So a phrase I use a lot with myself and with people I teach this to is this phrase: I notice I'm having the thought that, and then you insert the thought. So as an example, if I'm experiencing disappointment, for example, or I might be beating myself up in my head about something that's not gone well at work, there's a difference between saying to myself, you're such an idiot, and saying, I notice I'm having the thought that I'm such an idiot. The second one has somehow got less power, perhaps less sting in it. So why I shared that is to say, when we sit down and we think, right, I'm going to do some mindfulness now, don't worry if those thoughts pop up from everywhere. Right. I think you asked me, though, what do you do with those thoughts when they come up? And that's where the classes and the apps come in, because all teachers have different methods. Some people recommend that you sort of visualize them, for example. Some people visualize them as a hot air balloon or a helium balloon, and that thought is gradually drifting away into the sky. Other people like to use the thing of a sushi bar, and you've got that conveyor belt of little dishes coming past, and just to notice your thoughts going past you without you needing to associate with those thoughts.
Oh, nice. I like that.
That's quite good because it's got food in it. So I like that one.
As a plus.
But there are other techniques like, seeing thoughts as bubbles popping up on a still lake surface, clouds rolling by in a sky. And if you're not a visual thinker, that's okay as well. You can just sort of mentally note, I'm planning, I'm having the thought about a thing I need to plan later. So, yes, it's all about noticing as you have them rather than not noticing and then being caught up in that thought.
That's really interesting. So that makes me feel like I probably gave up too early then when I was trying before. Yes.
Possibly. It's a very real obstacle, though. I think expecting a result at any point in your mindfulness journey. By the way, if you're brand new or you've been doing it for years, expecting something to be as you want it today, because this was how it was yesterday when I did the same recording or same app, it won't be. It won't be the same. There'll be a different outcome. So there is also this principle of acceptance, as well as I said earlier, non-striving, not trying too hard. This idea of accepting whatever comes up when you're trying a bit of mindfulness as being okay, as being part of your present moment experience. Accepting that and letting go of any ideal that you have of a blissful, beautiful, sunset on one leg, sort of, open to the universe stuff. It doesn't look like that when I do it. It doesn't look like that when anyone does it, except on Instagram, maybe.
Yes. With a nice hashtag underneath it.
Oh, yes.
So were you saying about how long the classes last? So, because I quite often hear when people are talking about doing mindfulness, you could, if you wanted to prepare for a meeting or something, you can try and do something just before the meeting. So you could potentially do it. You wouldn't need to set aside like, I have an hour today to do it. You could do it in smaller segments, like 5 minutes or something like that.
You can, and some of those techniques that are shorter are really helpful when we might notice a heightened level of anxiety, for example, or if you were about to go into a meeting, or you're about to go into, around MS, for example, going into, I keep mentioning MRI scanners because I've helped a few people to really relax and calm down. Those techniques sometimes are, strictly speaking, not mindfulness meditation. They are more relaxation techniques, but they're still sort of related to mindfulness, I would say. So they can be things that you can do in 2 minutes at your desk or sitting on public transport or in a waiting room in a hospital without anyone needing to know that you're doing it. Sometimes we look at mindfulness as depicted online, and it looks like we have to wear certain clothes and look a certain way and be, as I said, on one leg in a sunset or something. And it's not. It's something you can do anywhere. And a phrase that mindfulness teachers use a lot, it's really cheesy, I warn you, is mindfulness of breath is the best one, because you've always got the equipment with you. You've always got breathing with you. So that's something you can always just bring your attention back to your in and out breath. And it only takes, a few moments to do that. And you've brought your attention back to the here and now, which is the goal.
Well, that's interesting. So actually, apart from doing exercises before you have an MRI scan, if you're actually inside the scanner, maybe that might be a good place to do a bit of mindfulness as well, because it can be dreadfully boring in those.
It can, absolutely. I think my last one was an hour and 40 minutes.
Oh wow.
They did give me a break halfway through. But and I fell asleep, because I do tend to do some of this when I'm in there, and I seem to be tired a lot of the time, so I fall asleep. But yeah, you can do it while you're in there. You do it beforehand. Absolutely.
And so, saying about being tired, when talking about fatigue and things, how can mindfulness sort of help with MS symptoms, or how does your symptoms feel like when you're doing mindfulness?
It's an interesting one, again, because I have had, I'd call it slightly inconsistent results with this, around using it specifically on certain symptoms that I have. So when I say slightly inconsistent, not predictably guaranteed every time to the same level. But with regard to, for example, pain, mindfulness doesn't remove pain, but it changes our relationship with pain. Our perception of pain, I suppose, is, I'm not a clinician, so I'm saying, I suppose, our perception of that pain isn't the same as the pain. So I guess all of us sometimes will have pain associated with MS. And on some days it feels more intense or more painful than others. The MS hasn't improved or got worse necessarily. It's just our perception. So for me, mindfulness helps me with that perception, with that relationship with pain, with my tolerance maybe as well. I also would say there's a huge benefit, and again, research backs this up also, in the well-being aspects as well. So the fact that it's a big deal having MS, and actually if our overall outlook on life can be enhanced through these practices, it's worth doing as well. So that's another reason why I practice it.
No, absolutely. I think it's funny now, because this podcast will go out at the start of January, and everybody in January rushes around trying to they go on a diet, or they're going to start new exercise, they're going to change their life. And I had actually made as my sort of, I don't like to say New Year's resolutions, but a task for the year was to try and really try to do mindfulness, because I find that would be a far better approach than trying, after the stress of December, trying to sort of, cram in new exercise or lose weight or what have you. I feel like that we like to bring it back to being kind to yourself this month, and actually really concentrating on feeling better. So I feel like mindfulness, I'm going to give it a go this time. I think I feel like now, when you told me that I don't need to sit and come to a sort of a blank mind state, because my mind clearly never wants to go there.
Absolutely. It's something that you can also, if you discover a local course near you, or you decide to practice with some teacher online, you will find there are some practices around mindfulness and mindful breathing, mindfulness meditation, that don't require you to sit still as well. So for people who feel they have the mobility and it is safe for you to walk about, for example, then that is a really, really good option. There are mindfulness techniques while you are walking. There are mindfulness techniques you can learn and practice with headphones in, about appreciating the outdoors. So it doesn't require us ever to sit on the floor with our legs crossed. as long as you are in a reasonably upright position for most of it, because the posture there is one that embodies what we're aiming to do with mindfulness, which is to be aware and to be present and awake. So, an upright back, but nothing too rigid. It's fine. Yeah. So I think you mentioned being kind to ourselves, and there's a real part I think mindfulness can play in that. And this point in the year that you mentioned, January, sometimes we're not that kind to ourselves. We see this hashtag every year called New Year, New You. I hate it.
Yeah,
I
same.
like to replace it with New Year, strong you, or something. New Year, kind you, something
Yeah,
else. And there is definitely a place for some of those mindfulness practices around self-compassion, for
yeah.
example, but also letting go of this ideal of who we ought to be and how we
Yeah.
should be coping with our MS, because we're all individual and it affects each of us differently, doesn't it?
It really does. And I think, social media can do a lot of good things, but also a lot of bad things where you do, like you said, you see somebody on one leg out in the desert and you feel like, oh, that's what I need to achieve.
Yeah.
Or this person is running, or this person is doing this, and why can't I do that? But we all have our individual journey. And I think it's so important not to compare when it comes to
Yeah.
MS. What about skeptics out there? I mean, I'm sure that you must run into these type of people. Why should they give it a chance?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I've had a few people say to me, um, since I've been diagnosed, and I'm open about my diagnosis,
Mm,
um, have asked me what do I do? Do I have treatment? Do I follow any sort of advice? And
yeah,
when I've shared about practicing mindfulness, they've said, well, how do you know it works?
yeah,
How do you actually know that it's making any difference at all? And I suppose I don't for
yeah,
certain. But what I do know is that alongside, for much of the time, me having an altered, more, I won't say more positive, but just an altered relationship with MS, it's also helping me to have better blood pressure. It's also
yeah,
helping me to deal with the other stressors in life. It's also helping me with low mood. There's research that suggests it's linked to better immune health. So I think there's so many other benefits, not
yeah,
just the MS thing. But I'd also say, if somebody has looked at it, tried it, and really feels it's not for them,
yeah,
then that's probably the right decision for them. Yeah. But there are, for anyone who wants to look it up, there are several clinical trials, research
yeah.
studies on this. So it's gradually growing in acceptance, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's lovely to see that there's quite a lot of neurologists that are, advising
Yeah.
that this is a route that you could go down, and certainly the MS nurses are talking about it as well. So I feel
Mm,
like within the MS community, it's definitely something that is recommended, and I think
that's good.
that's good. Yeah, and you spoke a little bit about going to courses or doing it by yourself. If you're feeling a bit self-conscious about these things, because it can be a bit daunting to try something completely new, have you got any advice for these people?
I think everybody, if you go to a group, everybody will be feeling self-conscious at first. Everybody. I can remember one of the early courses I went to many years ago, the very first session, doing what was required, doing what the teacher was leading us through, but doing it and having sort of half of one eye open to look round and like, what does everyone else look like? Am I doing it right? Does it look the same as everybody else? And I think that's really normal. And I think because mindfulness meditation at times asks us to be aware of and to practice things that ordinarily we wouldn't normally do. So, for example, if somebody says to you, be aware of your breathing, notice your breathing, and that's not actually about changing our breathing's
Yeah,
pace or depth, just be aware of it. Suddenly, most of us have the thought of, I don't know if this is my everyday breathing.
yeah,
He said, be aware of my everyday breathing. Well, is this how I breathe every day? I don't know. And so,
yes,
like you said earlier, thoughts pop up,
yeah,
but there's also this questioning: Am I doing it right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um, I think once we all accept, yeah, it's a bit self-conscious at first. Um, we do move past it, and we do move past it, and keep forming it as a habit. Then those thoughts of being self-conscious just fade away, really.
question. If you want to get into mindfulness, and you mentioned before that you were young when you started with this, and I feel like, they talk about being kind to your mind quite a lot in school these days. Is this something that you could involve the whole family with?
Absolutely, yes. I think that many, if not all, schools are so switched on to mental health and well-being nowadays, and mindfulness meditation, and also things like yoga and other breath work is used in schools. And so, for example, my son learnt some mindfulness at primary school. I know it's an option at senior school that he goes to. So actually, if you have young people in your life and you're exploring mindfulness, why not involve them as well? Because there are definitely practices that you can do together, so that you're not alone, and it's also a good way of connecting with people as well as supporting the whole family's well-being too. Yeah.
Before you go, Justin, could we just tell us a little bit where we can find you online if people want to learn more, or if they want to see what you're doing or what you're up to?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on X, what used to be called Twitter, The Mindful Dad. You can search for me on there. I also write a blog, comeonbabylightmyfire.com. I write about mindfulness, but I also write about psychology and personal improvement and leadership as well. And then there's a website called calmbarn.com. So calm, CALM, and then barn, as in a building on a farm, BARN, calmbarn.com.
Brilliant. And we'll pop those links in the show notes as well. This has been so interesting, Justin. I will let you know how I get on with my my plans.
Yeah.
And fantastic. And also, we will definitely link to your video that you did before, because I know that was very popular when we live streamed that during MS Awareness Week. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Great to be here.
Now, if this was a commercial podcast, here is where there would be an advert. But as you know by now, we are a charity, so we don't do that. So instead, this is the time where we would like to take the opportunity to tell you all about our fantastic resources for people with MS.
Yeah, and such a good place to start with this is our website, which is mstrust.org.uk. On there, you're going to find information, resources, everything that you need to help you make sense of MS. So on there, you'll find wellbeing and MS resources. So there's ideas of how to live well with MS, how to try and exercise best with MS, information about sleep, mental health, relaxation, mindfulness too. So if you head over to the website, that's mstrust.org.uk, and go ahead and click on the tab which says information support, and on there you'll see the health and wellbeing tab. And don't worry, of course, we'll link to anything that we mention in the show as well.
I love talking to Justin. I think you could tell from I got really quite inspired what he was talking about. But bringing back to what you said before the interview there about how you think mindfulness is something, because if you do a Google image search or Google it on, or go to Instagram and search for mindfulness, you're definitely going to see some serene, beautiful looking person sitting there in some yoga position, looking like, there's no clutter, everything's lovely. And, it's not everyday life. It is everyday life for some people, but it sure isn't everyday life for me. So like talking to him about that actually this can be done anywhere. This can be done mostly by everyone. Just made me feel really inspired to try it, because I think the vision of what you have of what mindfulness is and what it actually is quite different. Have you ever tried mindfulness yourself, Nick?
Yeah, no, I have tried it a few times. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, I've done a little bit of sort of meditation and that kind of thing as well. And I think you're right. It does feel like almost like a barrier, doesn't it? Sometimes when you're like, oh my gosh, I can't, I find it really difficult to stay still and just concentrate on breathing or something like that. And I don't have all of the gear and the yoga chic and all that stuff,
Yeah.
But actually I think it's also inspired me as well that actually, yeah, it's something that I'd like to try again, and just those day-to-day things, isn't it? And I tell you what, like at the moment, I find myself, there's very rarely, time in the day where I'm actually being conscious and aware, because if I get like a spare minute, I'll often look down at my phone, or I'll like scroll through, social media, or I'll scroll through, stuff that I'm interested in on my phone. And like actually during a lot of the time, I'm not actually being present.
Yeah.
And actually that's some of those just like small windows in the day that actually I probably could be doing more.
Yeah. I think it was interesting because some of the things you were saying is that it doesn't need to necessarily be, sat still doing it. You could do mindfulness while you're walking and things. Quite a lot of the times, when I'm walking into work, I feel quite present in the now because I'm looking and noticing what's around me. There's a bit of nature. We got lots of squirrels out at the moment, and that's very cute. But like you say, otherwise, if you have 5 minutes, you sort of quite easily start doing the scrolling, and then suddenly it's like 20 minutes later and you don't even know what you looked at. If somebody would ask you what did you just read, you'd be like, what? I don't know. So I think it's interesting because I think for me to make this sort of thing work, I would almost have to build it in as a routine rather than try to say that, okay, I'm going to just do it as and when I'm going to take 5 minutes out at lunchtime or something. But like for me, when I started running, it was very much like I have to do it through a schedule. So I put down like these are the days that I'm going to try to go and do a run. I'm following this program. So I quite like the idea of it sort of being, if you sign up for a class, that you have like a specific time of the day that you do it, because I think there's been lots of research in this, hasn't it? And I think Charlie Peel talked about this in a previous episode. We can link to that, about the research of how long it takes to build a routine and when you notice changes. So I think maybe the idea of saying, okay, well, I'm going to try starting this, and that could be either through signing up for a class or downloading one of the apps. We'll link to some of the apps in the show notes as well. I didn't really talk to Justin about them, but he mentioned a few to me afterwards, so I will definitely link to those ones on there. But there's things like Headspace and that you could sign up to for free and just try out some of these like little plans. But I think actually trying to set, obviously things works differently for everyone, doesn't it? But I feel like for me, I would have to try and make it into to almost have it as a Teams reminder on Outlook, maybe saying that, okay, well, today on Wednesday lunchtime, this is when you go and do some mindfulness. And then I would actually prioritize it rather than end up doing scrolling on my phone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I think it's definitely a good thing. I think, I think if it's not booked in, not necessarily on a calendar, but unless I sort of make the plan of like, I'm going to meditate or be mindful, is for me, it's far too easy to fall into that. Those situations where I'm scrolling, where I'm like, I'll just stick the telly on instead. I've got 10 minutes. But I think also what I find is when I do fall into those traps of doom scrolling, of just sticking on the radio or the TV or whatever and sort of zoning out, is that actually throughout the day I won't feel as good, or I won't feel as productive. So it's interesting listening to Justin about like the impact that it has on his sort of day-to-day life, and just like some of those interactions with other people, for example, like if someone cuts you up on the road or something, if I've had 5 minutes where I've been mindful or meditated or something, I probably will react in a different way to if I've got up, scroll through my phone, watch it, stick the telly on, not really listening, whatever, completely zoned out of everything, and then someone cuts me up on the road. I'm much more likely to react in probably a negative way. But I won't mention what that might look like on the podcast. But
No, it's so true, though.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I liked what you were saying about that you don't have to have a blank mind either to try and do it, because like even though I can sort of zone out completely, I don't feel like then I'm not at all according to that definition of being, what was it, the quality or state of being conscious or aware of something, is almost like the opposite of that when you start zoning out. But like when I was trying to do mindfulness before, I was really super aware of all these random thoughts, like really stupid thoughts that popped into my head, that I thought like they shouldn't be here now. I'm supposed to do mindfulness now. Why am I thinking about tomorrow's dinners or whether I got enough socks for the kids, but that was sort of almost doing mindfulness there, because I was noticing these thoughts, and I noticed that they come up at the strange times. So I suppose it's like when you've had a bad interaction with someone on the on the motorway or what have you, that you would actually, instead of feeling really like, yes, I am acknowledging that these feelings are here, rather than just kind of, I don't know, it's a bit of a different state of mind, isn't it?
For sure, yeah, you're much more aware, much more present, aren't you, and much less reactive. So yeah, I think, it's made me think about, starting again, trying to get back into it. So during the recording, Helena, as well, Justin sort of talked about some of the resources that he made last year with the MS Trust as well. So there's a video about why he practices mindfulness with MS and why you might be able to give that a go too, and also a guided meditation as well. So if you want to have a go at completing the guided meditation, we're not sure where to start, that could be a good jumping off point. So we'll link to that in the show notes. So give it a go. Please do let us know if you have a go at it. Either drop us a comment on our social media or on our YouTube, or drop us a line on comms@mstrust.org.uk. We'd love to hear from you. We'd also really like to hear from you as well if you've got any ideas for topics that you'd like to hear covered on the podcast. So that email address again is comms@mstrust.org.uk. Speaking of getting in touch, if you do have any questions about MS, we're always here for you. So you can go ahead and get in contact with our helpline service, which is available from Monday to Friday, apart from UK bank holidays. And that's between the hours of 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Outside of these hours, you can leave us a message and we will get back to you as soon as we can. So the number to call us on is 0800 032 3839. And if you'd rather get in contact via email, you can contact the helpline team on there on ask@mstrust.org.uk.
And you can always find us on social media as well. We are on Facebook, YouTube, X, TikTok, and Instagram. And you can find this podcast on most places where you would listen to a podcast, like Spotify and Apple Podcast and Amazon Music. And the video is up on YouTube as well. So you always feel free to drop us some comments on there as well. We'd absolutely love it when you like and subscribe for YouTube and for the podcast. And if you want to give us a review, we would absolutely love that too. And now I guess I'm off to try some more mindfulness now.
Yeah, sounds good, Helena. Yeah, enjoy.